was a lovely week I had, and I hope you all had a lovely week here too. The sun's out again. It is rather warm, I found. We were just discussing in the build-up to starting the call today the thought of putting your underwear in the fridge to keep cool. I'm not necessarily saying it's a good idea, but it's something that's in the Guardian today, which some of you may consider if you get really hot. Welcome to another Active in Redbourne weekly call. I'd like to thank, first of all, my colleague and good friend Chris Emmel for hosting the call last week. Thank you for doing that, Chris. Sorry I wasn't able to do it. I was in France, getting injured, coming down mountains. As always, thank you also to everyone who's donated to keep these calls free of charge for our listeners for the last few months. Very clever people right now are working on making this live on the Redbourners Facebook page, and afterwards it can be found as a recording there and on our website. And as in previous weeks, everybody bar today's speakers is on mute, so you can make as much noise as you want to. So you get the kettle boiling, dogs barking, all the rest of it, no problem at all. Now this week, I'm pleased to say we have a theme, a broad theme of good food and a healthy lifestyle, which is always important, of course, but all the more so in times like this, I think. And I'm delighted that we have Justin James from Redbourne Bury Mill, followed by Kathleen Horseman to discuss it with. And of course, we have Will, our lovely vicar. We will no doubt be entertained, inspired and informed in equal measure, and I'm sure that our guests will leave us all feeling happier and better than we do now, which is, after all, the whole point of these calls. So without further ado, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So, Justin, can I start with you today?
Yes, of course.
Good stuff. So can you begin by telling, so you're at Redbourne Bury Mill, which I'm sure we all know about and love. Can you tell us a little bit about the mill, its history, any interesting facts about it, sort of things that you think people might like to know about?
Yeah, very happy to. It's got a long history, the mill. The earliest record we have is in the Domesday Book, which in St Albans was about 1087, so probably the best part of 1,000 years ago now it's been there. At the time it was owned by the Abbey of St Albans. It then became part of the Crown Estate at the dissolution of the monasteries, and eventually it was sold to a gentleman with a wonderful name, somebody called Sir Harbottle Grimstone, who is one of the ancestors of the Earls of Verulam, so it became part of the Gorhambury estate, and it remained as part of that estate until the beginning of the 20th century, when it returned to the Crown. And at that point it was run by tenant millers, and for the 150 years before my family arrived there, it was run by the Hawkins family. And the last of that family was a remarkable lady called Ivy Hawkins, who ran the mill by herself until she was in her late 80s. Oh, wow. And she was referred to as the last lady miller in England. And she had a whole article in the Times newspaper in the 1950s written about her as the last lady miller.
Crikey, what a fantastic history. That's the Domesday Book. I didn't realise it went that far back.
Yeah, obviously not the building that's there now. The building that's there now is mostly 17th and 18th century, but there would have been a simple wooden building there right back in the beginning of the 1000s, yeah.
Crikey. So can you tell us about your involvement and how you got to get involved with it and so on and so on?
Yeah, of course. So my family purchased the mill back in 1985. Ivy had moved out a couple of years earlier, and she moved up into a nursing home in Redbourne. And when we arrived, it was like a time capsule. The mill hadn't been used for about 20 years for milling, but Ivy had continued to use it to cut firewood and to grind oats and things in the mill. And there's a great story, not a great story, but an interesting story of her in the 1960s, when she would have been in her 60s, trying to cut some firewood in the mill on a circular saw driven from the water wheel, and a log floated downstream and got stuck in the water wheel, and Ivy went out to try and remove the log, and she climbed into the wheel to do so. And as she pulled the log out, she realised she hadn't quite shut the sluice above the wheel, and the whole wheel started turning. And there was no way out. Once it was turning and she was in it, all she could do was jog around inside it until somebody heard her screaming and they came and stopped it. And she was in there for several hours apparently, and then back at work the next day. So she was quite a remarkable lady.
What a lady! Wow.
Yeah. We took on the mill in 1985. We started the restoration, and then in August 1987, it was struck by lightning and caught fire. And the mill house was very badly damaged, but the mill was pretty well destroyed. So what we thought was going to be a quick and easy 6-month restoration program in 1985, or a little bit longer than that, has now taken sort of 30 years to get it back into full working order again.
Okay, so we'll come to lockdown in a minute, but just before we come on to that, you've obviously then for a long period of time been making wonderful products down there, Justin. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been baking and how wonderful they are and how good they are for us?
It's a nice relationship between us, the farm, and the bakery, because the farmer, Howard Roberts, up at Hammond's End in Harpenden, he tries to grow organic wheat, rye and spelt for us, which are our three main cereals that we mill. Unfortunately, last year we weren't able to get anything from him because the harvest wasn't great. So this year we've been milling wheat from slightly further afield. But whenever possible, we get our wheat from Howard, so it's grown less than a mile away from the mill. We mill it at the watermill itself and produce organic stone ground flour, and the majority of that then goes straight into our own little bakery, and we produce a whole range of artisan breads and cakes. And for people visiting the mill, they're seeing bread which is produced right from source, so we like to say from crop to crust. So they can see it growing in the fields, they can see it being milled into flour, and then they can taste the produce from the bakery.
Oh, so super fresh and super wonderful and super tasty and
super low miles, yeah.
Super low miles, yeah.
No food miles whatsoever, yeah.
Oh, good. Good CO2 footprint then as well.
That's it, yeah.
Okay, so that's been going on for a while, and then lockdown happened. Just tell us a little bit about how you coped with that, what the sort of issues were that you faced, and what you had to do, if you don't mind.
Well, the last day that we were open was Saturday the 21st of March, which was just the day after I think the lockdown was announced, and it was just absolute bedlam at the mill. Everybody at that point was panic buying. Flour was one of the first things to run out in the supermarkets, and it seemed to us on that Saturday morning that the whole of London and Hertfordshire turned out to come and try and get flour from us. And we would normally sell 1/4 of a ton of flour a week or something, and we sold 2.5 tons in an hour on that morning. And we ended up having to shut the mill early and having to turn customers away, sadly, because we just simply had nothing left. So at that point we had to shut the mill because of lockdown, of course. And so at that point we changed to doing a delivery service and a click and collect service, which has proved quite popular.
And is that still going on now?
It is at the moment. In fact, we've just decided to reopen the bakery this coming Saturday, so the 15th of August, the bakery stall is going to reopen. So I think we'll continue to do click and collect throughout August, and then hopefully as things return to some sort of normality, we can then stick to what we used to do, which is to have the bakery open, and the mill will be selling flour as well.
Oh, that's hot news. So just to be clear on that point, Justin, people can rock up on Saturday morning, can they, without having pre-ordered something?
Well,
yes. Or would they need to pre-order?
They certainly can, but we don't want the whole of Redbourne there at one time. We don't want a repeat of the 21st of March, where it was. I don't know if you know, I know that you personally know the lane, but it's a very narrow little lane that comes down to the mill. And if we have 50 cars trying to arrive at the same time, it becomes rather problematic. So, yeah, just a few customers each hour would be lovely.
Okay, but you're still doing the click and collect thing as well, are you?
We will be, yeah. So Tuesday afternoons and Friday afternoons, people can pre-order and then come and collect it at those times.
Lovely, lovely. Okay. Anything else you'd like to say to the listeners about your, before I ask you one final question, about your wonderful custard tarts? Anything you'd like to share with the listeners?
The thing I'd like to say is that at the moment the mill won't be open, the museum itself, but we're very hopeful that hopefully next year, maybe at around Easter time, we'll be able to open the mill itself and welcome back visitors, because it's such a great place for families to come, and children in particular. And children can explore the mill, see how the flour is produced, and as I say, they can see the whole process of the farmer growing it all the way through to the production of the bread itself, which is so important for children to see how food is produced rather than just going rolling up at a supermarket and thinking it comes out of a plastic bag. So yeah, next spring, hopefully the whole place will be open again.
Oh, super! I like that. It is absolutely lovely products you have down there. So I'm going to have to. I'd love to end on a custard tart, if I may. Just as you know, I'm rather fond of them. Anything you want to tell us about your wonderful custard tarts that people might be tempted to buy them?
Well, I'd love to tell you there was a recipe for them, but Stephen, I'm the miller, but Stephen, our baker, is very possessive of his recipe, so I won't tell you the precise ingredients, but I know that you're a connoisseur of custard tarts.
I am indeed, yeah.
Listeners enjoy them too, so if you want a custard tart, then you need to come down to the mill on a Saturday morning and taste one for yourself.
Thank you. I do remember the first time I ever bought I'll doubt you remember this, but the first time I ever bought one from you, God knows how long ago that was, a long time ago, you said to me, if you take one of these, you'll never want another one from anywhere else. and that's actually worked out to be true. I've never ever had a custard tart from any other source since I had one of yours. There we go.
Fantastic. I'm really pleased to hear that. I'm glad you enjoyed them, Simon.
I do. Well, Justin, thanks for that. That's really interesting. Great news that you've survived and that you've provided a great service to the village, obviously, during lockdown. And it's wonderful to hear about the great work that you do. And as I say, low CO2 footprint, great products, healthy products, all wonderful stuff.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And also a big thank you to all of our volunteers, many of whom live in the village. The whole place is run by volunteers, and we couldn't do without them. So a big thanks to everybody that helps with the mill.
Great stuff. Thank you, Justin. Okay, so now we're on to Will. Will, good morning.
Hello, Simon. Good morning.
And how are you today?
Yeah, really well, thank you. A little bit warm. It's not the right weather to be wearing a black clerical shirt, but never mind.
Oh, is that what you're wearing today?
Yeah.
Did you put it in the fridge?
I didn't know, but
okay.
I hadn't heard of this, so maybe if the warm weather continues a bit longer, that's something to consider.
Okay, well, I suppose we all like the warm weather, but it's getting a little bit too hot, I think, for some people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, Will, so anyway, we're delighted to have you back on again this week, and the floor is now yours to give us your thought for the week.
Lovely, thank you, Simon. One of the features of lockdown has been the number of online quizzes that have been taking place between family and friends. This seems to have been happening a lot, and we're no different. Each week we've been having a quiz on Zoom with various members of the family in far-flung parts of the world and in different bits of this country, joining in with their spouses and partners. It's been quite fun, although Claire, my wife, and I haven't usually done very well. But it's never been first and foremost about the quiz, thankfully, but a chance to get together, albeit via technology, and see everyone each week. It's also provided a welcome fix point when the weeks have generally been so shapeless and the days hard to distinguish from each other. Well, in the spirit of the family quiz, I'd like to ask you all, our listeners this morning, a question. What is the name of the station on the London Overground line, the one that runs between Richmond and Stratford, the station that sits between Hampstead Heath and Kentish Town West? Well, that's quite a tricky question, but the answer is Gospel Oak. It's an intriguing name, and a chance conversation with a near neighbour last week got me thinking about Gospel Oak and made me do some research. Is there really an oak tree there, and why is it called Gospel Oak? Well, apparently the name Gospel Oak derives from a local oak tree, under which parishioners gathered to hear regular gospel readings when the area was still rural. The oak of Gospel Oak marked the boundary between the parishes of Hampstead and St Pancras. The oak vanished sometime in the 1800s, but was last recorded on a map of the area in 1801. There are reports that the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, preached from the oak, with the 18th century farming population meeting there regularly. Because the tree is no longer to be found, Michael Palin, who lives fairly nearby, attempted to replant a new oak tree for Gospel Oak in the area in 1998, but sadly the tree has not survived. The history of Gospel Oak can be traced as far back as the history of Hampstead, which was documented in 986 by the wonderfully named Ethelred the Unready for the Abbot of Westminster. Situated as it is in the southern part of Hampstead Heath, the area was in years past referred to simply as South End Green. But when the now lost great oak tree of Gospel Oak became famous as a preaching spot, as I've said, in the 1700s, the area came to be known as Gospel Oak, and the name continues today, even though the tree has long gone. Well, it seems as though quite literally there's nothing new under the sun. Back in the 1700s, people would gather by their oak tree to hear the Bible read and to pray. And here at St Mary's, we've been doing the same thing for the last few weeks for our 9:30 service on a Sunday. We've set out the lawn with white squares so everyone can socially distance in their deck chairs, and we set up a lectern to read from and an altar for communion. And just behind all of this stands our own oak tree in the church grounds. It makes a wonderful backdrop and setting for these relaxed times of worship each week. We're so blessed to have such an amazing church at St Mary's, the oldest building in the village, at well over 900 years old. It's a lovely place to worship, and you quickly, when you enter, get the strong and tangible sense of it being a place of focus and worship over the centuries, where members of our community have come to say their prayers week by week, as well as christen their babies, marry their lovers, and lay their dear ones to rest. But I have to say, lovely as our church is, and as immensely fond of it as I am, there's something very liberating about worshipping God outside. It's so freeing somehow. As we hear the bird song and watch the mercifully few clouds roll by in the blue sky, we can feel very connected with the Creator. It was St. Francis of Assisi who famously used to preach to the birds. There's something about recognizing that we're part of God's created order and connected intimately with it, rather than standing apart from it or over it. Ancient plans of the cosmos used to have this idea of the layers of the heavens and the earth, with humanity down at the bottom on earth, and then the layers of the weather and clouds and stars and moon, and then God sitting majestically on the top of the firmament. Whilst it put God firmly at the top, it did rather play into this idea of layers and separation. And our worship outside has wonderfully done the opposite. The pandemic has taught us a lot about separation and about connection. Separation and isolation for those who are shielding or frightened to leave their homes, but also connection. Connection with family and friends by technology, quizzes or not, connecting with our neighbours in support and in new friendship, connecting in some ways with people who face the challenges of coronavirus in different parts of the world, something about our shared humanity. And being outside for walks and worship has connected us with nature and our world and God. And for that I am very thankful and grateful.
Well, as always, fabulous little thought. Thank you for that. I'm always amazed at the amount of information that you possess. It's just extraordinary.
It's not always carried in my head, but I know where to turn to, and I need to find something.
Yes. I mean, I'd have you in my quiz team, I have to say.
Oh, thank you. My excuse is they're always just the wrong questions.
Absolutely,
they don't suit me. But there we are. But they're good fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I've just got to ask you about Ethelred the Unready, by the way. Which made me. Do you know what he was unready for? I mean, I'm not saying I do, but I just wonder. It's such a brilliant name.
Apparently, he was thrust into power at a young age, so he was always known as Ethelred the Unready because he hadn't expected to take the throne quite then. So,
right.
But it's quite a tag to carry around with you forever.
It just,
yeah. I don't actually know whether he was any good as a ruler or not, but he was clearly unready at the time, but probably grew into the role quite quickly.
One hopes so. Well,
I'll find out some more, Simon. I'll let you know next week.
Please do. Can we have a little bit on Ethelred next week? We'll be good.
Yeah, by all means. I'll do a piece on Ethelred and unreadiness.
Thanks, Will. That's
there
great.
you go. Spoiler alert.
Thank you. That reminds me of an idea that Rachel Mackey had actually, which was to have a little fact every week, which we haven't got around to doing yet, about an unusual or interesting or little-known fact about Redbourne. So perhaps we'll kick it off the week after. If we're going to have a little bit of Ethelred the Unready next week, the week after that, we'll think of a way of every single week, and it doesn't have to be one of us, it can be anybody from the village, somebody can just say something on the call that's unusual or different or little known about Redbourne. I mean, I've got one that I'm dying to talk about, which is to do with John Keats, but there's millions of wonderful things about Redbourne, so that'll be a little bit of fun for the future.
Wonderful. Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. No, pleasure.
Good stuff. So, Catherine, all this time you've been waiting patiently out there, so thank you so much for doing that. How are you this morning?
Morning, Simon. Very well, thank you.
Good. And are you still cool, or are you overheating?
Yeah, slightly the latter. I might try your freezer trick.
Okay. Well, it wasn't my freezer trick, I have to say, but in a minute it might work. Okay. So, first of all, can you begin by telling our listeners what the interesting and important things that you do?
Yes, of course. I'm a nutritional therapist, and I've got 17 years background in HR, but after having my children, I retrained and studied nutrition for 3 years at the College of Naturopathic Medicine in London. So I specialise in helping people who are dealing with essentially mental health problems, anxiety, depression, low mood, just general overwhelm. And I use a sort of combination of nutritional and lifestyle strategies, which might encompass the use of supplements, it might encompass using functional testing, and my approach acknowledges a very important and, in my opinion, not talked about enough connection between the food we eat and how we feel. So I guess my key principles are we aren't just what we eat, we are also what we digest and what we absorb and what we eliminate. We can have a fabulous diet, but if something's hindering the absorption of the nutrients or hindering the elimination of the waste products from the body, then our health will suffer. And the other key principle is how unique each person really is in terms of what is impacting them. As you'll probably be aware, the most popular theory of depression is based on a lack of a neurotransmitter called serotonin. But actually that's not the only neurotransmitter in our brain, and there are lots of other factors that can influence our mood.
Wow. Well, so wow's the wrong response there. Sorry, I was just thinking, it's just so interesting, Catherine, what you're saying.
It really is. I mean, you know, someone can be feeling very low, and it's because their iron levels are on the floor, or their thyroid function is sluggish, or their blood sugar levels are all over the place. And also, Simon, another really important point is people think of anxiety and depression and they think of the brain, but actually over 70% of our feel-good neurotransmitter, the serotonin, is actually made in our gut. So if we do have something that is hindering our gut function, then that can really negatively impact that feedback loop and that delicate interconnection we have between all the systems of our body.
So when someone comes to you, Catherine, how do you sort of establish, forgive me if this isn't a very elegantly worded question, I'm just trying to get the words right, but how do you establish, sort of as it were, what the problem is or what they need to change in their diet?
So we go through a sort of objective process of asking them to quantify the key symptoms, the 2 key symptoms that are really impacting their life, and ask them on a scale of 0 to 10 to quantify how much that is impacting them and their well-being and their life in general. And, you know, it's fruitless to address someone's diet and not address their sleep, stress management, any kind of emotional issues that might be underlying. And that may well sometimes require a referral to another expert. But, you know, we can't do one without the other because we're so deeply interconnected.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've heard from the mill about their wonderful products, including their world-beating custard tarts. And of course, it's all organic and it's all beautifully produced stuff that they do down there. How important do you feel it is to eat organic food if we can, and to reduce the amount of chemicals and pesticides and all the rest of it that we can consume if we go to supermarkets and so on?
I'm a very strong believer that it's absolutely critical that we do reduce that chemical load that we have now. And I do regularly buy the organic flour from the mill and make my own bread when I have time. But I mean, we're literally exposed to hundreds of chemicals every day. Our body doesn't have a natural pathway for dealing with these chemicals that it doesn't recognise. You know, our ancestors didn't deal with these man-made chemicals. So it puts a real burden on the major sort of detoxification organs that serve us so beautifully in our body, our liver, our kidney, our gut. And that's when, you know, we run into problems, when those organs are under strain. So It's so important to make sure our air is clean, things like, opening all the windows every day, house plants, air filters, making sure our water is clean, so with water filters, and in particular personal care products that we slap on our skin. It's our first line of defence, our skin barrier. Yet we'll often rub into our skin things that contain parabens. I really recommend an app called Think Dirty, and it allows you just to enter your product on that, and it will tell you on a scale of 1 to 10 how clean or not that product is. But of course, another massive area, which I'm a strong believer in, is organic food and eating organically whenever possible. So we're not ingesting the pesticides, the fertilisers, any hormones that have been injected into our animals. And obviously the downside is the higher cost, but what I always recommend to clients is focusing on those couple of things that are eaten the most in your household. So if that's bread, then make sure it's a nice organic bread. We've got this lovely mill on our doorstep.
Absolutely.
Because our wheat is sprayed with this weed killer called glyphosate. There's quite strong evidence to show the carcinogenic properties of that. So that's not something we want to be eating. And things like milk, we already get some growth hormones naturally in our milk because they're produced for the animals young. But if we can eliminate any more hormones that's being given to encourage it to grow, then that's great. So, focus on the things that you eat the most. And also on my website, I've got a handy list of those fruit and vegetables that are called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15.
Wonderful expressions, yeah.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's just the Dirty Dozen is those 12 fruit and veg that really absorb the pesticides and hold on to them. So they're the ones to target organic for. The Clean 15, actually it's fine if you don't get those organic.
Oh, I guess at this point I should suggest that you give people the details of your website, Catherine, if they want to make a note of it. What is your website detail?
Yes, absolutely. It's www.Catherine, Katherine, Horstmann, HORSTMANN.com, and I'll also make sure I add that to the recording on the Facebook page, Simon.
Oh, lovely. Thank you for that. I'm sure people will be interested. I mean, I can't wait to find out about these dirty and clean things myself later, so I'll do that once the call's over. Thank you.
Great.
Thinking a little bit more broadly, Catherine, as we sort of come to the end of today's call, I'm just thinking about sort of a healthy diet generally. I don't know about you, but I've got this sense of we've all got sort of information overload about everything that comes our way all the time. We're bombarded with stuff. How do we know what a healthy diet actually is? If that's not a stupid question.
No, it's not, and I think that's very true, and you can find anything that you want to find on Dr. Google, but from everything I have studied, and I've poured through lots of scientific research papers, I believe that the main principles of what is called the Mediterranean diet is the most sound. It emphasises eating sort of whole, fresh foods. By that, I mean a particular focus on healthy fats, enjoying fruit and vegetables in abundance, and cooking from scratch, avoiding processed foods, and keeping red meat occasional. So really going back to basics of real food that isn't laden in plastic, sweeteners, additives, preservatives, and, everything else being in moderation.
So, yeah, it makes sense. And there's lots of evidence, isn't there, that people live longer and live healthier lives, particularly in sort of southern Europe, where they have this kind of diet more than we do. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.